And we're now recording. Christine, go ahead and begin.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. So this is more of a discussion base, and I would just like to pick people's brains, especially the hardcore SDers, on models that they have seen and models they have done, and whether or not they have been implemented. But this all came from as an idea that I've had for a while because I was taking a course through Dartmouth College, and it was on implementation science and how different organizations have been trying to implement different ideas, and there have been a lot of frameworks involved in talking about how you measure implementation and what is good implementation. And I thought there have been many models and many frameworks, but we have not seen many, simulation models on diffusion and implementation, but I have not seen many success stories in which people have used results from our simulation models. I don't know if that's just due to my personal experience or if this is also the experience of other people. So, okay, I'll start. First, I want to talk a little bit about some background, some interesting terminology that I came across when I was taking that implementation science course through Dartmouth. And then talk about some models I have seen but have not really studied on diffusion and implementation, specifically ones in health.
Christine, good question. Implementation science, where is that? Like, what department is that taught in?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part. What
department is that taught in? I'm just curious, like the context of the implementation science.
Oh, it was through the health policy school, actually.
Okay.
Dartmouth has this thing called the Dartmouth Institute, which is their health policy school. And it was just a special topic for the spring semester of this research methods seminar series that they have, and I was thankfully welcome to. Okay, so some different definitions that I've seen. There have been these three different terms that have been talked about within implementation science, and they wanted to specify that implementation is an active and planned effort to mainstream an innovation within an organization. And dissemination is an active and planned effort to persuade target groups to adopt some innovation, while diffusion is a passive spread of innovation. And I don't know if any of you have any ideas about this. This is very discussion-based, so please feel free to chime in.
I think
if you think this is all bullshit, then, oh, sorry, I shouldn't swear on recording.
too late now. We're going to submit it to Congress. No, I think
Memorialized now.
If you've seen my recordings, Christine, you're already 20 swear words behind me, and we're only 3 minutes in. But I think this is a good point here, is these three things: implementation, dissemination, diffusion. Obviously, what do you guys think? There's the vast diffusion model. That is a passive model, and it's one of the biggest reasons I dislike it, is it just sort of assumes diffusion happens. There's lots of reasons why it happens, but it happens. It just kind of flows out.
But I think the vast, though, it has sort of there are seeding processes, which I think they're active components of the diffusion, though, that
Right.
get it started. Because when it starts, then you can call it an osmotic type process.
It's very much an osmosis. It's like pouring a liquid into a thing, which is your seeding, and then it just kind of spreads.
Right. But people, there's the social stuff. Do you call it the social path? The social component of diffusion?
Well, it's
passive? I don't know.
Well, and that's the thing, is I don't think, the implementation, you'd probably see some agent-based models out there where person A has to meet with person B, and it's much more discrete like that, and that may be what's talked about active and planned.
So that was the thing I was going to say. When I saw diffusion, I think that maybe as a unique term, it's something not quite passive. It's kind of passive because you've seeded it and it just kind of grows. That would be the passivity of it,
or it's a level of aggregation. To me, this is almost a level of aggregation because nothing spreads passively.
But that's what I'm saying, right? So, what is that though? What's that social spread? Maybe it's interesting. So
it's a mechanism below the aggregation of interest, maybe? What do you think, Shia?
Go ahead.
All I know from corporations. Go ahead, Shia.
All of these categories are focused on the kind of the spread of ideas by pushing from the creators or generators of ideas or those who want to sell. So I was thinking that what about those kind of a spread that is kind of pulling instead of pushing? For example, people search for ideas to adopt. What about those things? What category is that one?
That is my biggest pain with the diffusion, the vast diffusion. What I was about to say is with corporations that have problems, which is where most of my background is, they go out looking for things. So they're very actively engaged in identifying a problem and then going out looking for an issue. And then maybe the ideas are out there passively, they've been spread, but the person is going out and pulling an idea in to get it, and then they have to implement it in a very active way, change management, knowledge management, all this stuff.
So the person I thought was interesting in this space that has a view on this is Leandro Herrero. I just looked him up. He has a viral change. He talks a lot about the differences in the way that the change. You have who's the other change? Cotter's change model. Is that the typical change model?
I'm trying to be silent here a little bit because my original PhD, as Saeed remembers, was in memetics. Was looking at memetics, how ideas evolve and spread, memetic evolution, which is all about how ideas move around, and it's a very, very different way of looking at the question of knowledge.
Herrero, so they have different views of how things spread.
Yeah. What is Cotter's view?
It's a traditional, you get people, you introduce the idea, and then you have to, get people acclimated. So it's almost like, you're going through
like education,
it's the eight stages of change and stuff like that. Versus Herrero thinks of like it's a viral process.
So Herrero would be like memetics. The memetic concept is it's much more like an evolutionary process where the ideas spread themselves.
Yeah.
And it's almost viral where an idea gets in someone's head and then the person becomes a vehicle for spreading the idea.
Yeah, he talks about like brush fires and concepts like that, and then other stuff's like kind of engulfs. He's got a lot of different things. He thinks it's more. He talks about this human dynamics piece of it, and there's things that are interesting about how all these little components come together. So
if you these are all fairly high level, I think, to your question, but I think it's a good place to start. If you're taking notes, Cotter, Hero,
Kotter. Those these are two kind of classic things. And there's Herrero, Herrero.
There's also Kuhn, Khun. He has a huge piece on the structure of scientific revolution, which is all about ideas and the solving anomalies and those. And that you might want to do a /Dawkins, and Dawkins only has a chapter or two, and it's a very controversial because it's he's a biologist and he's gotten into some wacky areas recently, but he has a chapter on memes, which is this concept of the idea spreading itself, which unfortunately these days has been largely related to cat videos. But the original concept of a meme is an idea that the internet meme you see on Facebook and stuff. That's a meme, a self-spreading idea. But a concept of Six Sigma, when I originally came in, I did a study of Six Sigma as a process improvement, as a self-spreading idea. It has a utility. As Saeed said, people have a problem. They go looking for it. They get infected by it. They spread it themselves throughout the organization. Someone carries it to another organization. But anyways.
So, just to add to Tim's comment on Kuhn theory, I think it's also helpful to look at Jonas Sterman's translation of this theory into system dynamics model. So Jonas Sterman actually took this theory and translated it into a system dynamics model, and there is kind of follow-up from Jan Barlas and Mike Radzicki, who actually reflected on that translation. So they are available from System Dynamics to review if you are interested.
This may be getting ahead of where you want, Christine. A lot of this is a question of classic, what are your boundaries? What's your point of view? what's your bias, what's your problem, what's your level of aggregation, your slicing questions. Are you looking down at diffusion within a single hospital or corporation or branch office? Are you looking at diffusion across an economy? I did a model in the latent structures class based on my experience of enterprise transformation. I've done a lot of enterprise transformations, and I actually built it off the soldiers, farmers, bandits, except I switched it to be soldiers were advocates, farmers were adopters, and bandits were resistors. And it was very tangible about how in a corporation, those three roles play the very on-the-ground role of changing an organization. You have advocates pushing a change, adopters accepting it, and resistors acting against it, and the interplay between those three determine whether it gets adopted or not.
Sorry, my audio cut out a little. I don't know if anyone else's audio cut out.
I'm fine here.
Okay.
That's
okay.
Yeah, it was just a soldiers, farmers, bandits model
Yeah.
adapted to change.
Okay, thank you everybody for your insights. And, I forgot to explain some of my research. So right now I'm just doing data analytics on looking at what are the predictors and understanding why certain certain psychotherapies for PTSD within the VA has not spread faster, and understand using a data science standpoint what are the factors involved. And then eventually I will end up building an agent-based model, most likely, and to understand the diffusion process of these psychotherapies within the VA. And that's why I'm interested in diffusion or implementation in this aspect, because this is a planned effort within an organization, if you want to go by the definition of implementation scientists. Okay. So while reading for the implementation science class, I found that these two papers talked about frameworks that might be interesting to us. The first one is more of a review paper in case one of the audience members is interested in reading about the different models within implementation science that are not SD models or any simulation models, but just models in which people are making sense of how to implement change. And these models talk about things like having a champion and different characteristics which help the adoption process, such as having individuals who are more similar to the people whom you want to adopt. So it's easier for someone with the same socioeconomic background or education or professional or cultural background to spread these adoption among people who are similar to them. And then they also talk about things like leadership buy-in within organizations that will facilitate implementation. So the second framework paper is where I saw that they actually talk about change existing and how interventions change over time. And that made me think of dynamic modeling. And within this framework, they actually specify that they are a dynamic sustainability framework, and they're thinking about change. And next, I saw that some of these frameworks also cited different models, like the Mass Diffusion model, which I did not list here because I wanted to list other models that people might not be as familiar with. And the first one is Jack Homer's dissertation and his model on the emergence of new medical technologies. And the second model that I've seen talked about briefly, or just cited within these frameworks and review papers, is Peter Hoffman's model of implementation of evidence-based practices and organizational performance, and Nelson Repenning's model, a simulation-based approach to understanding the dynamics of innovation implementation. And then I did some literature searching myself, and I saw within agent-based modeling that there is a review paper that I still need to read on agent-based simulation of innovation diffusion, a review. And in that paper, I remember when I briefly skimmed it, that they talk a lot about how agent-based modeling, you focus more on the individual, and you can overlay a social network on top of this, and talk about the different weights on and the strength of the different links within people in order to spread diffusion.
Saeed, you know these really well. Are any of these based off that Sturman and Homer work that you mentioned earlier that are sort of later versions of it or earlier versions of it?
Sorry, I didn't follow.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but you'd mentioned some articles earlier. Do you know if any of these happen to be based off that work or predecessors to it in the SD world?
No, I don't think so. So
Okay.
if you are referring to John Sturman's Kuhn's translation of Kuhn's theory,
That
no.
was late 90s, wasn't it? Wasn't Homer part of that?
I think so, yeah. I think it was in 1998 or something. I don't remember. But Reppenning and Sturman's model is totally different, although some aspect of them could be, similar.
I'm trying to think of one more first.
Okay. So I was just curious if anyone else knew of any other models that I have missed.
So, yeah, there's one other one that I looked at for Saeed. I'm trying to find it. I'll find it right now. It's in a book. It's in a book by Complex Systems in Finance and Econometrics. So
This is one of those areas, Christine, I don't know if you're in my lean discussions, where there is probably a huge gap between practitioners who do change on a day-to-day basis and academics who study it. My entire career has been helping businesses implement things, and there's lots of other people who do. There is tons of things that are used out there related to change, frameworks, methodologies. Probably zero of them have been academically validated in peer-reviewed studies. And there's probably lots of literature that's been peer-reviewed and validated and tested, zero of which has ever been used in the real world. And there's probably this wide gap between the two. If you want materials of change frameworks, like you mentioned champions, the concept of champions or evangelist. Evangelist is someone who looks and acts and has the same demographic characteristics, but is passionate about something. I can forward you lots of materials about that, but it all comes from a business practitioner standpoint or a non-academic standpoint. So it may at some point you follow it back down the trail, be rooted in a study, but we just use these as tools, right? There are there's lots of frameworks out there. The question is, how do you bridge the two? And this is in Lean, where they even said in literature reviews, they said there are so few practitioners doing academic research, and there's so few people in academic research who have ever been practitioners. There's a gap between the two. And this may be another area where you find that, because change is such a huge thing in all areas. I mean, it's a constant wherever you go to run into this.
I also wrote a paper on dynamics of EHR implementation, in that paper, I focused on time management by physicians. So I used some theories from economics literature, how people manage their time. So the challenge in HR implementation was that physicians usually didn't have enough time to spend on practices of EHR. So that was actually a problem. So I tried to model that dynamics. So if you take, there are also some literature review in that paper, so you could use perhaps. That's a conference paper.
Was that Isa Baron? Was she part of that?
Yes.
I saw her present that. That was one of my first exposures to Len Malchensky and Isa Baron at IBM. We hosted a workshop in DC, and she presented that paper, I think.
Yes, I think so. So she presented that in Delft. If you were.
Yeah, I wasn't in Delft. They never paid for me to go to Delft. It was just
Okay.
DC. Small world.
I don't know how to spell your last name.
So, it's on Facebook. Christine, it's on Facebook.
So,
that's how I get it.
Langarudi. So there is just one. Yes, that is correct.
The other person,
so that is interesting. Your spell check recognizes my name. I'm famous.
I've cited your paper is cited, Saeed. I've cited your paper. It's in Google Scholar. You've got at least one citations.
So the other person is Milling, who's in the SD community. It's system dynamics analysis of the diffusion of innovations. Milling, it's Peter, and Professor Saeed says he's accessible. You'll find it. You just type his name and you'll find SD diffusion innovation. You'll find it.
And if you want, I can show you. I did bring up the model, the change model I built, which was purely based off experience of working in enterprise change. But that was experiential, not literature-based.
Yeah, it's just stuff I'm working on.
Experiential.
Yeah, because it's like
you've lived it.
Lived it. Well, we're looking about the things that actually cause innovation to stall.
Yeah.
That's that's one little kind of little slice.
So, as we already talked about, I like to do graphics, and I was thinking of we do data analytics, and then we do simulation modeling, and then we have implementation, and then there are data analytics on whether or not implementation works. However, I think there is a disconnect sometimes in which we do not go from simulation model results to implementation, and I just want to talk about your experience and my experience in this. And my experience is pretty limited in this aspect because I've worked within the VA so far, and a model I have done.
I think this is huge, Christine. I think it's something like I've never seen it done well before. It is, and I've never seen a simulation done on change that was robust in the real world. It is desperately needed because it is exactly the area that is hard. It's got feedback, it's got dynamic behavior, it's got time delays. It is, and most people use a grid of stakeholders that say, are they positive or neutral or negative, and where do you move them? And they look at it once or twice. I mean, it is one of the hardest things to do, and no one uses simulation on it. So I think this is what you're doing is huge if you can get into this because there's a need for it.
So I also wanted to talk to you guys about why people don't implement and what are the barriers within this field. And what I think of most is people and money. Those are the two biggest reasons why things have not been implemented, because people either just don't trust the model, there's no champion, no one within the organization who's pushing that SD works, this model works, and the culture is maybe resistant to change because there are no incentives. than I thought of.
Are you asking here why they aren't implementing the change, or why they wouldn't implement a simulation that models change?
Simulation that models change.
I would imagine many of them haven't seen it.
They don't have a
Never
perspective. They don't. Yeah.
Because there's not a money issue. IBM sold hundreds of millions of dollars on helping people change. Now, in budget, there's budget issues, yeah, but the budgets of these things are measured in paying people hundreds of dollars an hour. It can afford, at least in private sector. It depends where you go. In government, there's going to be budgets, but even in
I've been working at a big company that's been as enterprise change for years now.
the amount they lose. If you compare it to the opportunity cost of what they lose struggling with change, it's peanuts. But I think not aware of the model. But I think suspicion is right. Like they don't trust it. They don't trust the fancy math. We're different here. I hear that all the time. You don't know us.
We're different.
We're different, right?
We're more complex.
We're every industry's different. Every industry's special. Every industry's got it. And we hear this in system dynamics. It worked there, but it won't work here.
Yeah, because I suggested in a big company I work for, that why don't we leverage some of the standard process frameworks? Oh, no, we couldn't possibly do that because we're different. We're more complex.
Julie, what have you heard, Julie?
Yeah, so change management is actually a topic I've studied previously, and I was actually just flipping back through my old course notes on that. But yeah, I have not seen anything system dynamics related with change management, so I agree. I think that's an interesting topic.
And culture is actually, I think culture is one of the hardest things to represent because it's sort of an esoteric thing. So
I figured that out for lean. It's a double anchor. You have a short anchor for the short-term culture and a deep latent for the long-term anchor. That's what started me down the lean road. I think it's a double anchor for culture.
Well, you didn't explain it.
Either that, or you go with Said's 400 equation model, because Said did a much better one for the Iran.
What's the double anchor?
The double anchor is. Sorry, I don't want to take you off tangent, Christine, but the double anchor is a way of the lean enterprise transformation attached to the project dynamics model is what started me on the lean proof several months ago. And it's a way of representing the cultural drag of an enterprise that keeps it from changing. And it's the one that I started off with. I can draw it here on the board. It's really simple if people want to see it, but it's simply an anchor, an expectation anchor to something tied to a deep latent expectation anchor to the anchor on two different delays, so that even as the one anchor changes in the short term, there's a deeper anchor on like a long term, 5 to 15 years, that's pulling it back to the mean. And I can draw it on the whiteboard if people are interested, or
Okay.
Send it out.
Yeah, I can't follow what you're saying.
Scribble it and send it.
What?
I can't follow what you're saying, so it's easier to see it. Do I give you back control? I don't know how to do this.
I think Tim should scribble it and send it out in an email.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
Christine still has. Oh,
Yeah.
show it on the slides.
Well, let's get done with the slides. If we have time, we can do it afterwards, something like that. So there's lots of resistance to change. We have studies that we've done resistance to change, not seeing benefits fast enough, right? They start doing something. I can send you practitioner stuff as much as you want until you're screaming for mercy because you're buried in like PowerPoint slides. But none of it's statistically validated. It's all IBM.
So I went to these. They had these things. They had these culture champions. They were trying to do this thing, and they had this it was like trying to create like I equated to like trying to create like a super fan for like at a university for like a sports team. That's what they were trying to do, and they were trying to do it in a very short amount of time. And they were trying to create these culture champions to like pump people up all the time. But people you're competing. I don't know if the anger part. People have daily things they have to do, and then all of a sudden to transform their brains to be excited about something else than esoteric. They just don't get it.
Back in 1502, Machiavelli wrote about change. There's two quotes I always remember about change because I lived this. Nothing is so dangerous as attempting a change, because it's dangerous for the architect and dangerous for the building to change a building once it's built. right? You're going to collapse it on top of itself and the person doing it. And the reason why it's difficult is change is promising a future benefit down the road to somebody, which means all you're going to get up front is resistors who are seeing loss right now, and they're going to immediately go up against you. And the people who are going to benefit, they aren't seeing it yet, so they're going to hold off and not support you until they start seeing the benefits down the road. And that means you're immediately getting lots of people pushing against you and no one supporting you, which is why they have all these different things of champions and evangelists, because if everyone benefited, they'd all be on board. And that's a very true thing now as it was 600 years ago or 500 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the marginality around change. A lot of times I'm like, seeing, a lot of times I'm just
That's why we
don't see it.
That's why we flipped our lean stuff to deliver value in the first week that we were there, is to start showing benefits earlier. But I mean, again, you could probably find studies on this too.
Because these enterprise stuff that I've been involved in, I've seen like people create these like monstrous blueprints, and it's like months go by.
But that's it. They're creating cost without delivering benefits, and they're incurring resistors the entire time. If you can solve this, Christine, you get lots of money. put a copyright on it. Even if there's just parts of it. I think the main risk you're going to face, so stepping back for a minute, this is a huge topic. Are you familiar with Professor Said's slicing approach?
No.
So you slice something on like, and there's different things. It's basically you take a problem and you look at its time-based behavior, you look at its geography, like a domain, and then you look at its behavior mode, whether it's growing or declining or isolating. And you start slicing it in 3 ways. There's a paper I can send you. And what you get is very, very small slices of an overall large problem. And you build a very small model of that slice, really super small. Like the causal loop might be 2 or 3 loops. The stock and flow might be 3 stocks. What you do is you iterate these small models very quickly because they're easy. You're not trying to create this gargantuan solve everything at once. You're creating these small slices, and you learn from them, and then you start putting them together. Because this change problem, it's so big, it's so massive, there's so many different angles to it, it's quickly overwhelming. So it's like you pick an aspect of this, confine a time period and say, okay, the starting period of change, like the first 6 months of an initiative, looking at a single, why does the growth mode or why does the behavior mode do this specific thing, and literally just focus on that and build a small model, and then try and build lots of small models. And some of them will be wrong, but that's okay because you didn't spend much time on it. Rather than trying to build one big, large model that encompasses all this stuff. Because I think the big thing with this is it's so big, it's like trying to model the system.
Okay.
I'll send you that article right now. I use it in all mine because I tend to model the system by. It's my biggest flaw, but.
Yes. I think I try to do the same thing and try to analyze everything.
Yeah, it's going into his curriculum.
Data analytics too.
Yeah, it's slicing complex problems. Also use look for paradigms. I'm wondering what's the change paradigm. Fixes that fail. So so we talk about archetypes and paradigms. It's definitely fixes that fail. There's what else would be archetypes that you could leverage? Things that at the very aggregate level we could say are going on, maybe.
Shift the burden, I think, is also.
Yeah, burden shifting, definitely. Tragedy of the commons.
You probably can pick like why people resist change. You can pick this as you can do a real simple causal loop right there. Start with something like that.
Yeah. Well, I'm helping mentor one of my old lean guys, and he's doing why Kaizens fail.
Yeah.
And it's all about change for the most part.
I mean, they're all.
Have you interviewed?
I think there is also very another archetype developed by Jennifer Kemeny, I think. This is not a very famous one, but she calls it jumping from one boat to another in a white river.
Holy, like what's this?
The burning platform.
I've never heard this.
Cortez platform.
What is this?
Yeah.
Saeed?
I don't know exactly the name of this generative structure, but it is basically saying that switching from one system of one working system, which could be kind of, an old system, an old way of doing things, into another one is like jumping from a boat, in a white river. So it is very difficult.
White water or white river?
Oh, sorry, white water.
Got it.
So yeah. So that is basically saying that it is very difficult while people are very involved in everyday business. It is very difficult to fundamentally switch from one system of work to another.
And because I've been in white water, I bet a lot of that has to do with fear. We don't like the boat we're in.
Exactly.
But you're asking me to jump in rapids to this other boat, and I'm going to get crushed on the rocks. If I get in that other boat, I'm great, but I'm not going to make that jump. I'm not going to.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I've never heard that before. That's a great.
That's interesting. Does a different version, like, but what is it, Cortez, right? Where they did the burning platform, right?
But burning platforms.
You just remove. You don't have.
A
choice.
burning platform's the opposite. Like you have no choice, right?
Right. It's the same. So.
It's like the opposite of the burning platform.
Well, I mean, one is you've created.
I think that's more realistic. The burning platform has become so buzzwordy that people use it, and a lot of times there's no burning platform because people have been through so many burning platforms.
Well, no, they realize that the platform's done. It's
still there.
You just wait long enough, and there's really no fire. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Just smoke.
That's a great archetype. I'd like to see.
But
that.
that's an interesting thing, though. A lot of times, that's what people do. That's how they've existed. They just recognize the smoke, not real fire, right?
What are the archetypes in soldiers, farmers, bandits, Saeed? Did you work on that much, or was that mainly Rafat?
I used that structure for my latest paper, which is not published. So we haven't even submitted it in my dissertation, the third paper of my dissertation. So I use that generative structure there.
I've got it in a homework assignment. I'll see if I have causal loop, but I don't think I was identifying archetypes back then.
But I'm not so I don't know how that could be used for implementation problem.
Christine, when I open my homework for this, the first thing that comes up is IBM research on why change fails, and it's got several behavior mode arcs of different timelines of why things fail and the different behavior modes of how it fails over time. I mean, this is such a prevalent problem. I think that you'll find lots of benefit by doing this and taking places, even getting certain aspects of it fixed out. Just the ability to simulate this and walk people through to understand these different dynamics at play. I think this is really important stuff. So what's your go forward plan? So with the VA, I know there were some problems with data and things like that. What's the go forward plan, or what are you thinking of?
So I think I'm definitely going to build an agent-based model, and now I'm just going to think about how to translate maybe some of these archetypes into agent-based modeling, because I think that will be a big contribution to bridge the fields.
Yeah. Did they ever give you, do you have access to people to do interviews and get a mental, like a CLD mental model of why they think things fail in the VA? Because the VA is going to be the ninth layer of hell for why things fail. It's why I never ever went there as a consultant, is it's just, I've heard nightmare stories of why things don't work there. So have you done any interviews or things? Because they're going to have unique issues that aren't had elsewhere with all the government oversight and regulation and, sometimes interference and things like that. They're going to have unique things that really are different.
No, I haven't interviewed because it's not on my project plan. And I think if I interview people, I'd have to either do it unofficially or have to get IRB approval, which takes a while.
Yeah, don't worry about it then. I'm sure the generic reasons are all present. Because they're generic, there are just maybe some other ones on top, like it's against the law or,
Well, I was listening to the whole thing about the way people are protected somewhat in the VA because they're.
Well, I think that's one urban myth in some ways, protected, but there's also a lot of structural things that are
Right. I mean, it's not a traditional organization. Well, I think it's a traditional organization in the sense of it's a government organization, but it's different than like I said, a private company or something like that. So.
I don't know to what extent some of those, when people say folks are protected, are actually accurate.
Well, I mean, people don't have to do certain things if they don't want to, and there's a lot of protections being a civil servant.
Janine Rometty's still CEO of IBM after 20 quarters of profit.
Wow. Yeah. So, but that's
yeah.
But,
so I think So how are you looking to publish something or put it in a publishable format?
First, I'm still just focused on the data analytics that I'm doing at the VA because they're the ones who are paying me to do this.
Yeah.
But I think I need to go back and think about what exactly I want my third paper to be, the implementation paper. Because for my dissertation, I have to do a 3-paper dissertation, and my second paper is data analytics, in order to understand what are the different factors and whether or not a patient receives cognitive processing therapy or prolonged exposure. And the third one is the implementation of, or diffusion, whatever you want to call it, of cognitive processing therapy and prolonged exposure within the VA. But for this specific topic, I'm not sure how much I will have time to.
Yeah, if this is just one aspect of this could be a dissertation on itself. So definitely slice it down to something manageable.
Yes, and my experience with SD is not. I'm still a beginner in SD in my opinion, and I think I need to read more and look at models on these generic structures and see how they can be translated to an ABM model.
So one piece of feedback I got from Rafat, so I'm going to speak in Rafat's voice, so imagine this is with a better English accent, is you don't have to create a new model in your dissertation. The lean proofs, which is my backup dissertation, it's all someone else's model, right? It's the rework cycle from Project Dynamics. It's this other thing. What I'm doing is aggregating and synthesizing them in new ways. So if you're going out and researching some of these other models that are aspects you want to use, and correct me, Saeed, and other folks, but there's no harm, no foul in synthesizing existing model structures in new and innovative ways to get new insights on new problems, and using existing structures or using the generic structures. You don't have to go out and create a brand new large model. I mean, you obviously want to practice your modeling skills and build your craft, but it doesn't. The dissertation itself doesn't have to necessarily be the giant model you built.
I have a kind of more stronger actually perspective on this. Recently, I was reading a book about philosophy of science. I don't remember who was the author. I mean, who was the guy who was quoted in the book, but it was basically saying that no theory has come from the vacuum. I mean, all theories are synthesis of previously developed theories. Yep. So I mean, you cannot actually develop a theory that was non-existent before. There's always, you need to combine things together in order to innovate, to create new things. So,
and the standard I use is I look at it, and I don't know where this comes from, philosophy of science, but I read it somewhere. It has to be simpler, just as useful, and not as cumbersome or something to replace something that exists. Someone else may know it better. It's sort of like if a formula is a simpler formula, produces the same result, and is less computationally intensive, then it's worth creating something new. So I look at my structures. If my structure is simpler than a generic structure, I'll use it. But if a generic structure is simpler than my structure, I'll use a generic structure. I'll use the simpler structure that generates the result. And I just use that analysis to kind of say, where should I put my time and focus? And this is something that Shia will say, we banged our head a lot in 557 with the students and all, trying to get them to say, you don't have to spend all this time building complicated structure. You can use the building blocks of the archetypes and the tools to use these pieces. And if you know, that's okay. What is that? What is that, Saeed or Jim or Shia? It has to be a theory, quote unquote theory has to be simpler, more elegant, solves the problem better.
Yeah, I think simpler is great, but
Has-
the problem is simpler is hard.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, how to, I mean, because I will do my thesis next term, so I also have the same question. But I think I also am not a beginner in SD, and I think I need to read more SD papers. So because you mean based on my knowledge background and to integrate existing structures, existing models into my based on my knowledge background. But if I don't read more papers, I don't know what are the existing structures.
So that's what we talked about when talking with Professor Saeed about getting more explicit. They're all hidden in 557. There's 7 generic decision rules. There's 28 archetypes of causal loops, which can then be expressed in stock and flow. There's certain generic things. There's almost like this hidden toolbox of maybe 50 generic things that are labeled, and people build little cheat sheets of them. From that toolbox, you can probably build just about any model you need. Like Saeed and I were exchanging tricks. He was helping me with a resource allocation scheme between 3 stocks. Right? There's a little trick you can do for that you have. And so we were sharing that. And these toolbox of things, once you figure it out in one area, it's very translatable to other areas. So your toolbox doesn't grow exponentially big as you move across domains. It grows very slowly, incrementally, if that makes sense. What are your thoughts, Saeed?
I agree with you. That's short and simple.
That's kind of what we've had in mind for the book, right? Is no one's ever published the toolbox.
I'm not sure. I don't know.
I've never seen it. I have a cheat sheet Bible that every time I find one, I write it down, and then I go back and refer to that concept. I have a Word document that I keep them on. And
I think the only book that I know is the 5th Discipline, but it is very. It's only a descriptive work. It doesn't include simulation, but it introduces some of the generic structures.
That may be something worth topics in the CLM of cataloging those tools and creating a list somewhere that we can use and share. I know I've got a library in Excel of graphical curves that I've stolen from other people's, home. Like, this is a graphical curve for fuel or fishing and stuff like that, and you put the numbers in so you can reproduce. This is not when you're doing your research, obviously, but if you need to quickly create a graphical curve of predation in a system, and you've got a graphical curve for predation in a system, you can say, okay, this is probably good enough for now, we'll refine it later. It makes building stuff easier. So just know what you need to double check and cite when you get down the road. So I wouldn't worry too much about, but if you can do agent-based modeling, Christine, I think sometimes that's, with the social network aspect, that might be better for what you're looking at for the implementation through point-to-point, too. Because you can see person A talk to person B. Hallway conversations is some of the most powerful change, person to person.
Yeah, I think for diffusion, I think agent-based models could be very good.
And hybrids are probably, but again, keep it simple. Something you can. And what questions do you have that we haven't answered, or this last slide? Go ahead.
So yeah, I forgot about this last slide. It's what can we do about the non-implementation of models, simulation models, and I think it's mainly about education and marketing model. like you said, people are not aware of the model and what it can do, and they don't trust the model. And we just need to start early and have the stakeholders be part of the modeling process, as people always say. Because this is something I've been concerned about for a while, ever since I did my senior project, is that we do this work and we publish in journals, but if there's no real world change that happens, I feel like my research was a failure. And I don't know if anyone else feels this way, or if I'm the only one who feels this way as an engineer.
Well, I agree with you, Christine. I came into this PhD thinking that I was going to make all sorts of change and do great things. Well, just cross our fingers and hope that we get there, right?
And part of me wonders whether or not building these complicated models is worth it, because we're spending a lot of our time and it's not being implemented, it's not being used. Maybe a simple model is easier to trust and it's more flexible, and we can.
I think your approach, using ABM to address this question is very good. I believe the answer to this question is relies on the utility functions of individuals within the system. And I couldn't address this in my paper because I was using system economics, and system economics methodology assumes a kind of representative agents. So it would be interesting to see how heterogeneity of utility functions or preferences of individuals create different dynamics. So, and you could play with those things. So that is, I think, something that other people haven't considered so far as I know. So in that regard, I mean, policy analysis could be focused on, kind of financial, non-financial incentives for individuals. But each individual has a different utility function, right?
Mm-hmm.
So incentives for different people would be different. Maybe you could look at these kind of dynamics. I don't know.
So I think to your other question, coming from a non-academic background, I absolutely agree with you. I'm a consequentialist. If something in the environment doesn't change, the process of problem solving, to me at least, hasn't completed. That being said, I wouldn't say that it's the problem itself has to be solved to get that, because this is like baseball. Even a 300 is a good number. I mean, these changes are so complex that they're not all good. None of them are not. It's impossible to get 100% of them to succeed, and even 30% is a really good number. But if something's changed and someone's using it, I think that's good. I think that's a good standard. But a lot of times that's outside the control, and it will take a long time to get to that point where it can be used. I've been doing this for 5 years, 6 years, and I finally just got my first model used by someone in the DoD who can make a difference for the stuff I've been working on. So I mean, it takes time. And that's my big critique about system dynamics, that they do spend too much time publishing papers that don't ever get read or used.
Well, I think it's hard. This is the conversation I've had for Said, is like, how do you operationalize some of this stuff? We've been having some discussions because we're working on something right now, and it's challenging. We can talk in theory about saying, well, at some point you can operationalize it if you want to make it used.
I think
there's a gap. There's a divide between them, or chasm to get over.
System dynamics stops at the point of the idea and the policy recommendation and says, good luck, and walks away.
Yeah, now, Said says he's had a lot of success in operationalizing things.
Right.
So I'm saying, okay, well then, and he says you don't necessarily always have an explicit path through some known steps to operationalize it. He talked about his mitigation banking idea recently, and so that's because for me, I'm more pragmatist. I work in industry, and I need to.
I think this is a whole different topic.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
For beginners, there's a framework of how to implement and operationalize something, and when you're an expert, it's an art. So there is no
right,
because it's by.
But I think the thing you can do, Christine, you're trying to get insight into ideas about why something doesn't, why this diffusion doesn't happen, why this innovation. So that's part. Don't worry. So stepping back from that, don't worry about trying to change that. You just try to get the insight. Insight could be, you can stop at the insight, and that could be useful. Maybe you'll have some pointers or indicators of where you could go to improve it, but don't necessarily have to take it to the implementation stage.
And you also ever need to show the model. If you said that the goal is to change something, is it incumbent that the model is known up front? I know several SD practitioners who are fantastic in their field. No one knows they use models. They are known for their insights. They're known for their expertise. If this model is something used in the background, and a big problem is that people are scared that we're using this model and they're being simulated, they don't want to be guinea pigs. How about if this model is used in the background, it's used to help guide things, but the way of the implementation is not, the model's not out there visible. It's behind the scenes and people are doing a more human touch perhaps, but the model's helping inform them. That may be another thing that, it doesn't have to be that you don't lead with the simulation, you lead with the insights and the knowledge and the expertise that is gained from the model, and lead with that.
That's interesting. So you're telling people that you have these insights, but don't. Oh, sorry, was someone else speaking?
We're going to lose Shia. We are at the top of the hour. I can stay for a few minutes just to wrap up, but we are at the top of the hour, and I want to respect folks' time. So.
Thank you, Shia. Nice to see you.
I've got to run too. Thank you so much for the discussion. It's nice to meet you.
Julie,
who's next week? Julie?
Thank you, Julie. Nice to meet you.
You still there?
Yeah,
Julie, we have a question.
Yeah, sure.
I was interested in maybe outside of this talking to you about some of your work in the healthcare space. That's kind of where I'm focusing. And I work in the healthcare space. I work in med tech.
Can you text and email Julie, I guess? Or?
Yeah, or give me your email now or something. I don't know.
Well, we've got a chat here, so you can chat it across. Thank you, Julie. Have a great day.
Awesome.
Thank
you.
Okay, not here.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks. I need to go too. So
Okay.
it was a great discussion. Good luck to you, Christine.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you, Saeed.
Thank you. See you next week.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. I'm going to stay on the line, Christine.